The question arose as to whether or not the Retina Type 014 had a locating pin to stop the shutter from rotating in the mount. Now you can see quite clearly here that there is a notch in the mount, and if we have a look at the shutter and lens assembly here, you'll see that our shims have all got a notch in them where they would fit over a pin, and the shutter itself quite clearly has a little hole right at the back here, a threaded hole where a screw head would have fitted. A little stubby screw sat there and stopped this from rotating in the mount. And to illustrate this, I've got another Type 014 camera here which is complete, and I'll pull the shutter out of that and we'll just find out if that has the locating screw as I expect it to have. So into the back of this. It's screws a little bit tight. Here we have it, it's off. Let's see what we've got here. This one does not have a screw, though the camera is certainly set to use one. So it seems likely that some of these cameras had screws and some of them did not. Now here I have the shutter from another camera, and this is one that's obviously been very corroded, and I can see by these marks here that the retaining ring had to be cut off the shutter to remove it from its mount. So this was from some very rusty camera that has been pillaged for parts. But I'm looking at the mount and it's certainly from a Type 014. And interestingly, on this shutter the screw definitely exists. So it may have been present on some cameras but not all, or it may have been present on all cameras at one stage but was simply lost. But certainly for this camera that had the problem with the loose lens and shutter assembly, if that screw had been present there wouldn't have been a problem. So I'm going to remove it from this scrap shutter body and put it on the good one and see how I fare with that. Okay, well I was able to extract that screw from that very corroded parts shutter and fit it in place here, and I'll fit it back to the camera and see if it locates correctly. So I'll put its shims back in place, and as you can see they're all notched. They're all notched so that they will clear the screw. And I'll pop it back into the body. And that just drops in position, and as you can see that's fixed. That's not going anywhere. So that just needs its retaining ring in the back, and that'll be good. Now let me see if I can get that in position. I bought a very cheap tabletop tripod to see if it would help me do my videos in a bit more simpler way than using my current setup, which you've never seen, but which is somewhat rough. Yeah, that really doesn't want to run on that thread. I think that's dried out grease, I think, holding me back. I'll just have to clean that and put it back on. Well, much toing and froing was done there. I had my retainer ring. I checked that it went onto the back of the shutter assembly smoothly enough, and it did. But every time I went to do the thing up using one of my tools, it would go so far down, and then it would be very stiff. It'd be very hard to move. And I couldn't understand exactly what was happening there. But what it turned out to be is this. The tool engages with a slot either side of the retaining ring, and you just rotate it to drive the retaining ring on. That's a simple enough operation, shouldn't cause you any grief. But what was happening? Well, the slots should run absolutely central over that retaining ring. They don't. They're slightly off. So what that meant was that the tool was pushed to one side or the other side, depending on where you were sitting. And that meant that the tool was then rubbing on the rear group. And so as you got this seated further down the lens barrel here at the back, on the thread at the back, this would bind on the lens. So it wasn't the thread, it wasn't the thread on the retaining ring here. The problem was that the slots were slightly off centre, and because they were very neat, they weren't distorted at all, they were a very neat fit on the tool. It meant that the tool was just thrown off to one direction or the other. Now I can put it back on. Well, with the shutter back in place with a locating screw, of course it can't go anywhere, and so cock the shutter, it doesn't tend to rotate in the mount at all, and of course the shutter release just works normally. So that's the secret. It's that little screw that ideally should be present, and in this case wasn't. Now, why would it not be present? That's a bit of a mystery at the moment, and one that I'll have to think about, I'd say. Certainly it wasn't present on that other camera either, so perhaps it's a common fault. Just trying to think why that should be. I know if that screw was too long, then obviously the shutter wouldn't pull back into the body quite far enough. If the screw was too short, then possibly it wouldn't engage with the ring on the camera body. But I'm still a bit of a puzzle there, one I'll have to work on, I think. More on the subject of these shutters with and without the locating screw. Now you'll see here, this was the camera in question. Obviously there's a notch in the coupling ring here that couples it to the rangefinder, but also there's a recess into the inner helical. Here's the second camera. This was the one that had no screw in it either, and probably never had a screw in it. And what can I see here? Well, here's the same ring on the front, but there is no pocket down into the inner helical. There's no depth here to speak of where the head of a screw could sit to comfortably engage and stop the shutter from being rotated. Now, why is it like that? I've got no idea. I could see how somebody servicing the camera could do this, if they had the inner helical out to clean it and put it back in the wrong way round, they may get their focus to work correctly. They could certainly adjust it and make things work correctly, but their hole, their little pocket in that inner helical would be over this side instead of over here, and so couldn't possibly help engage a screw head. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that for some reason during the manufacturing process they just stopped doing it. They stopped milling that hole into the inner helical, and as a result we end up with this problem here where the screw was not present. Perhaps it was never present. On later cameras, the Retina II and so forth, the locating screw is shifted to out on the outside area here, out further out, and it engages directly with this plate further out from the centre, and so it would not conflict with the inner or outer helical. So there's a well, it asks more questions than it answers really, but it's life as we know it.